defeated him just as he, the outsider from Georgia, had beaten President Ford.
You know, you talk about President Ford becoming a good friend, and one of the things that has struck me in the course of these interviews is that each of you has in some way defeated another. I mean, you defeated President Ford, President Reagan and Bush defeated you, President Clinton defeated President Bush, and then President Bush defeated Clinton Gore. So it's remarkable, this system, that here are people who have waged incredibly intense battles against each other, and yet the civility still prevails.
It is. And I think the U.S. Constitution and its relatively unchanging nature for more than 200 years has been the foundation on which we can survive a very unpleasant election on occasion and a deeply grieved loss and an exhilarating victory. And we all feel that we are still part of a team, and that the principles of the United States of America, despite the exigencies of the moment and the political encounters that cause dissension and sometimes animosity for a brief period of time, are overcome because of America and what it is. And the Constitution of the United States is a basis for that stability and for that integrity, for that ongoing commitment to the same wonderful principles.
Have you been able to be more effective since you left office? And if so, what does that say about the system?
I've learned a lot since I left the White House. I now am the lead of the Carter Center, and we have programs in 65 nations in the world, the poorest, most destitute countries, and among the most forgotten and needy people on earth. And so I've learned so much since I was president about the needs of those people and what the United States could do. So it gives me a wonderful opportunity to use the office of the president 20 years afterward in a constructive and gratifying way. This last 20 years or so have been the best years of my life. Our dominant international challenge is to restore the greatness of America based on telling the truth, a commitment to peace, and respect for civil liberties at home and basic human rights around the world.
President Carter's departure from Washington did not end his public service. His work to end conflict and support human dignity around the world earned him the Nobel Prize for Peace. Thank you for being with us. I'm Cokie Roberts.
Major funding for presidential conversations on the Constitution is provided by Horace W. Goldsmith Foundation and
J.P. Morgan Chase, serving individuals, families, small businesses, and corporations around the world and in your community. Online at www.jpmorganchase.com.
and by viewers like you. To learn more about this program online, go to whyy.org. To own a personal copy of this program on VHS for $24.95 plus shipping and any applicable sales tax, please call 1-888-286-9499 or visit online at www.whyy.org.
With Tonight stay with Georgia Public Broadcasting for television you won't want to miss.
I'm Jim Lara. The third and final presidential debate takes place on Wednesday, October 13th in Tempe, Arizona. PBS will provide live coverage of this meeting between President Bush and Senator John Kerry. I invite you to join me, along with Mark Shields and David Brooks, for complete debate night coverage and analysis right here on October 13th on this PBS station.
Wednesday at 9 on Georgia Public Broadcasting.
Dance, drama, music, museums, and everything the arts in Georgia have to offer. Don't miss State of the Arts, October 20th at 8, right here on Georgia Public Broadcasting.
Georgia Public Broadcasting brings its members a world of entertainment. This October, when you use your Georgia Public Broadcasting member card, you get 2-for-1 admission to any of 3 exciting events with the Augusta Symphony, highlighted by the Pops concert on October 28th, featuring the incomparable Doc Severinsen, and the family concert on Halloween, complete with Spooktacular. 3 great reasons to use your GPB member card and support the member card benefit of the month. Most sports shows are all talk and no action. Touchdown! Wow! But leave it to Georgia's longest-running high school sports show to get you in on the action. Prep Sports Plus, Saturday at 11 and again at 6:30 on Georgia Public Broadcasting.
You're watching viewer-supported Georgia Public Broadcasting, your PBS station.
From NPR News in Washington, a PBS NPR News Brief, I'm Beverly Kirk. Democratic Vice Presidential nominee John Edwards predicts John Kerry will do well in tomorrow's third and final debate with President Bush. While Kerry prepped for the debate in New Mexico today, the president campaigned in Colorado and Arizona, telling supporters Kerry's a tax and spend liberal. The Supreme Court has agreed to consider the constitutionality of public displays of the Ten Commandments. The justices will hear arguments early next year. Good evening.
Viewer-supported Georgia Public Broadcasting thanks the following for their investment in quality television.
The Georgia Student Finance Commission, helping Georgians pay for college since 1965 with low-interest education loans, HOPE, and other scholarships and grants. Information available at gsfc.org.
Of a world war. They were prisoners of politics. The world stopped and watched 2 men fight for the title of champion.
I think Muhammad sees that he was a flawed man.
He became the most reviled and hated sports figure in American history.
He diffused the idea that black was ugly.
It all begins Monday at 9, only on Georgia Public Broadcasting.
This is Georgia Public Broadcasting, your PBS station, serving Atlanta and all of Georgia.
It's another beautiful day in Athens, home of the University of Georgia. On this day, the campus is full of students scurrying to class or studying in the sunshine. But here, there are special times reserved for excitement and tradition. 5, 6, maybe 7 days or nights a year when a great transformation occurs and more than 80,000 people descend on this southern town under a familiar cry. And this is where the Bulldog Nation comes together in Sanford Stadium, home of Georgia football since 1929. It's a stadium like no other, a mammoth structure dedicated to school pride and success. But like Rome, Sanford Stadium was not built in a day. It took vision, it involved risk-taking, and in the end, it meant the fulfilling of a dream, where everyone knows what it means to play between the hedges. The following is a story of one great stadium. This is the birthplace of Georgia football, a patch of flat land on the north side of campus. Military drills were the most common sight here, but that changed in 1892.
The founder, the guy who brought football in here, was a professor named Charles H. Hurdy, who later pioneered the commercial use of pine forest in the South. He had been an undergraduate here and interested in sports, and no sports, really no organized sports, sandlot stuff. In 1892, as a professor of chemistry, he brought intercollegiate sports into Georgia, especially football. And the original football field was called Hurdy Field. It was just an open lot. That was a very rough and ready field, but football was rough and ready in those days. A lot of injuries, not many rules, not much protective equipment.
Georgia won its first game, beating Mercer College 50-0. Its second and last game of 1892, a shutout loss to Auburn. The crowds, standing room only.
The rules were slack. It was a little vague who was qualified to play. Generally, if you had two legs and could breathe deeply, you could play.
Football caught on quickly at the university, a fact that a professor and administrator named Stedman V. Sanford noticed when he arrived on campus at the turn of the century.
He came here in 1903 at the University of Georgia, and he was really a schoolman, never been a coach. He had never been especially an athlete himself, and he had been a schoolman over in Marietta, Georgia, and he got a chance to teach English here at the University of Georgia in 1903. And when he came here, he got involved with the Athletic Association through faculty representation on that group.
And he held almost every administrative position you could hold at the university and was eventually chancellor of the whole system. He was always very active in sports as well. He's one of the founders of the Southern Conference, which was the granddaddy of the Southeastern Conference.
In 1911, under Sanford's direction, the football venue was moved more toward the center of campus, where wooden grandstands lined part of the field. It was called Sanford Field. Legendary Georgia tennis coach, sports historian, and assistant to Dr. Sanford, Dan McGill, went to his first Bulldog game at Sanford Field as a very young boy.
My father, who was editor of the Athens Banner-Herald, took me to old Sanford Field, which was built as a baseball park around 1912. He took me to see a football game there in the mid-1920s when I was 5 or 6 years old, but I don't remember much about it at all.
And they had wooden stands with a roof over them, much like sandlot baseball fields and Class D and C baseball fields used to have.
But as the years passed, the university expanded its fan base, you could say, by admitting women who clearly got a kick out of the sport and by getting better on the gridiron. The Roaring 20s ushered in a new era at the University of Georgia. Campus life was relaxed, and students would bend over backwards to be welcomed. Georgia would continue to play at Sanford Field, but the two words people in Athens hated to repeat kept coming up: Georgia Tech.
Georgia and Georgia Tech had a long series of real rugged controversy. There had been some real unseemly demonstrations of players and of fans against each other.
We accused Tech of using Army officers from Fort McPherson. They accused us of bringing in runners too, probably both correct. The game ended in a riot when Georgia Tech won, and the Tech players barely got back to the train station and got back to Atlanta, where they had a wreck on the train over there. We didn't have anything to do with that.
The Jackets-Bulldogs rivalry on the field heated up, but the battle for fans was clearly won by Georgia Tech, where Tech's Grant Field held thousands more fans for games, which meant Georgia had to travel to Atlanta to play Tech every year, and that was getting old.
Georgia from 1900 until 1929 had to play the main rival, Georgia Tech, in Atlanta every year except 1 year. They played it once, 1916 in Athens. And it upset Dr. Sanford that we didn't have a place big enough to seat all the interested fans.
And the goodwill of the people of Atlanta was important to the university, so I don't think Sanford wanted to outdo Atlanta so much as be on an even playing field, so to speak, more than so to speak. And I think it was important to him that we rival, that the University of Georgia rival Tech in facilities as well as in academic programs.
So it was then that Dr. Stedman Sanford decided the University of Georgia was ready to go big time.
When he came here and was on that athletic committee, he was a faculty representative to the Athletic Association, and he had spotted this kind of low area between the old campus and the ag campus. And it's a natural ravine, and of course it looked like a natural amphitheater.
The South Campus had developed after we became a land-grant school And the North Campus was the original old campus, and this little natural valley rested between them, and there wasn't anything much on it. It wasn't an ideal construction site. There was a little creek that ran through the middle of it.
The spot was next to Sanford Field. Sanford defended his cause.
People no longer attend games where the facilities are not modern and not adequate to carry the crowds, their pleasure, and their comfort. Colleges likewise do not like to handle games with colleges that cannot handle large crowds and cannot have modern facilities for the players. The students and the players likewise are entitled to facilities equal to those found at other universities of similar rank and standing.
One thing that bothered him about the Tech series in Atlanta, in 1927 we had an undefeated team, 9-0, ranked #1 in the country, and we had to play Georgia Tech on Grant Field. We had some fast backs. Well, the legend is that Tech watered down the field every night for the game to make it a quagmire. They beat us 12-0, and Dr. Sanford, they say, I didn't hear him say it, said, "We're going to build a stadium bigger than Tech. I swear we are. We're going to play that game in Athens every other year."
But where was the money going to come from?
The Athletic Association had just put up a new gymnasium, old Woodruff Hall, which was a barn-like structure, and they just didn't have any money. But they were convinced they could make money and prosper with a good stadium.
Sanford knew what he needed to do.
With this Athletic Association connection of his, he hit upon the notion of having members of the Athletic Association who are alumni sign notes, not give the money themselves, but sign as a guarantee of notes so that the money could be borrowed from a financial institution. Eventually, the Georgia Trust Bank made the loan, but he limited these note guarantees, and several hundred people signed those notes. In fact, some people wanted to sign the notes even after they had oversubscribed. So it was a very popular thing with a minimum of personal investment and yet a commitment on the part of the people that they would be good for the loan.
They were known as the stadium guarantors, and they were entitled to 50-yard line seats for the rest of their lives. But they didn't have to pay a dollar.
Our plan, we think, was both unique and original. We asked loyal friends and alumni to lend us their moral support and financial credit. This plan was acceptable, and they endorsed their name to the Athletic Association.
Sanford, I suppose, deserves a lot of credit because he was a driven, activist sort of administrator. And also, of course, the supporters deserve a lot of credit. The University of Georgia graduates are loyal supporters of this school.
So in 1928, with a guaranteed loan of $150,000, roughly half the stadium's cost, Dr. Sanford and the university embarked on the project of a lifetime. With money in hand, construction began to transform the Tanyard Creek bed into a 30,000-seat stadium. Some of the work had already been done by nature.
In the development of campuses, when football stadiums started to be built, they were usually built on the edge of the campus, not in the old core where the academic center was. And so they looked for land that was really not the best land for academics. And that usually was a ravine-type area, where the bottom land would be the field and the earth sides would become bowls that you would build concrete bleachers or concrete stands on. And that was a very economical way to do it. So a lot of stadiums on campuses were built in this kind of ravine situation.
The stadium's architect was T.C. Atwood of Chapel Hill, North Carolina. The plans were similar to those of the University of North Carolina's Kenan Stadium, which had just been completed.
The architectural plan was almost like a canned program because the builders had been doing stadium around the country in other locations. But the location of the facility itself was, I think, really his choice and his decision. I think most people had recognized it's a natural. This would be within sight of where the baseball field was, Sanford Field. But it was now to the east of that location and had these natural embankments that could be used with a minimum of excavation to prepare it.
Work proceeded at a furious pace. The hardest workers were mules and prisoners.
In the 1920s and 30s, convict labor was used a lot. Remember in Gone with the Wind when Scarlett was running a lumber business, she hired convict labor. That could be abusive, and sometimes was. I don't think it was particularly abusive when they used convict labor to build Sanford Stadium. Apparently these laborers were kept in a stockade over by the river, and they worked on this project.
throughout the 20s and 30s, there was a great deal of convict labor used on public works projects, and that's what Sanford considered the stadium to be, a real public works project.
I remember seeing the convicts with the striped uniforms on, so it didn't cost anything to build for the labor part.
On many a day, you could see Dr. Sanford out there, shovel in hand, purpose unwavering.
It is no longer the city that attracts the football crowd. It is the football game that draws the crowd. Today, the college realizes as never before that the contest must be played on the college campus with a college atmosphere present.
At first, they talked about 12,000 seats and then 24,000 seats, and eventually they built a stadium with 32,000 seats. And they were thinking about $3 to $7 a ticket. That meant something to the economy of the university and to the larger community. I expect that's why Sanford was able to get the city fathers to support the project. And the truth is, you couldn't get a good crowd without a good facility. And we were losing games. He couldn't schedule games here without a good facility. And that was a major part of trying to build that stadium.
In a little more than a year, it was done. Tanyard Creek now ran underground through a concrete culvert. A new field, tons of concrete, and freshly painted bleachers sat on top. All around them, a legend was already growing. The hedges, which surrounded the field, were just 12 inches tall.
They were put there as just a practical way to separate the field from the stands.
Around 1926 or 1927, Alabama was the first Southern team to get a Rose Bowl bid. Their business manager of athletics, or athletic director, was a good friend of our business manager, Charlie Martin. And he invited Mr. Martin to go with the Alabama team out there to the Rose Bowl. And Charlie was impressed by the hedge of roses, the beautiful hedge of roses around the field in Pasadena. The original plans were to put a hedge of roses there, but the horticulturist at the university said it wasn't feasible. But Privet ligustrum thrived here.
Georgia football was truly ready for the big time. The Georgia Bulldogs had a brand new stadium. Now all they needed was a big-name opponent. All eyes were on New Haven, Connecticut.
We had been playing Yale for years on pretty much even terms. Yale would not come south to play. We had to go up there to play because they were a bigger school and had usually a better football team. But Yale was our parent institution. The first two presidents of the University of Georgia were Yaleys, and they recognized in a kind of friendly, paternal way that we were their stepchild.
Some of the favorite games had been the games at Yale in New Haven, because there are a lot of historic connections between the founders of the university and New Haven. In fact, Abraham Baldwin is considered one of the founders of this university, was a Yale man. And so historically there had been this attempt to keep a connection between Yale Bulldogs and the Georgia Bulldogs.
On October 27, 1928, a local businessman, Ralph Murray, wrote to his friend, Yale Athletic Director John Cates.
Jack, just imagine the benefit to Yale if they were to come down here and play. Think of the publicity they would receive. All the papers in the South would be talking about it, and it would result in many a fine Southern chap finding his way to Yale for an education.
Yale's answer was yes. The football team's first ever trip south of the Mason-Dixon line would be to Athens.
Sanford scored a real coup by getting Yale to appear here rather than make the trip to New Haven. So that was a major accomplishment of his, and he took a lot of pride in that.
October 12, 1929, Yale had arrived by train, met by enthusiastic crowds, and bands were parading in the streets of Athens. Dan McGill was 8 years old.
Went down with my father, tagged along with him. That was a big deal in the old days, seeing the team off on the train. The student body would see them off and they'd welcome them back. Well, it seems like everybody in Athens went down College Avenue all the way to the train station to greet the Yale team. Well, they didn't cheer too much for the Yale team because they were all Yankees, you know, and the war between the states had been over, maybe 70-something years, but all of a sudden they still looked askance at the Yankees. And when the Yale band stepped off the train and were playing their tunes, nobody cheered them much. But when they went by the reviewing stand at the City Hall, there at the top of the hill on College Avenue runs right into the university. They broke into Dixie, and they got the biggest cheer you ever heard, and they were accepted from then on.
Georgia, led by Coach Harry Meir, was the underdog. People came by train, by foot, and by automobile. More than 7,000 cars. The atmosphere was one of celebration. A shining new stadium was being introduced to the world. Seats were $3 apiece. Not a cheap price in 1929. The place was sold out.
I went to the game. I put on my uniform, a full little football uniform I had.
The temperature hovered around 90 degrees. It's in October. They used newspapers to protect themselves from the sun and to keep away the harsh sunlight. Men removed their coats, and ladies fanned themselves with special 50-cent programs sold at the game. Cold drinks were consumed by the thousands.
The governors of 9 southern states were here for that occasion. It was really a big deal.
At halftime, Dr. Sanford went out to midfield for the dedication of the stadium that bore his name. His team would not disappoint him or the rest of the Georgia faithful. All-American Vernon Catfish Smith would be responsible for all of the Dogs' 15 points, while the defense stymied Yale. The final, 15-0.
There was no hard feelings after the game. I guess it helped that we won.
And as one account put it, at the end of the game, students set bonfires and rang the chapel bell all night.
The New Yorker magazine explained it as being a case of the Yale boys not having sense enough to stuff their ears with cotton in the pregame ceremonies with all the hoopla and speeches and all the brass bands, that they were confused, sweaty, and baffled in trying to run their plays in cadence with 1880s oratory. It was as great a victory as getting the stadium built, is to beat Yale in that inaugural game.
The game and the stadium, both were a smashing success. Yale donated its half of the gate receipts to help Georgia pay off its loans. In just 5 years, Sanford Stadium had earned its keep. It was now one of the largest stadiums in the South. But like a young child, it had plenty of room to grow, and grow it would. Meet Herschel Scott.
Nobody calls me Herschel around here. Everybody calls me Mr. Bulldog.
The pride of nearby Monroe, Georgia.
I started years ago giving cards and quarters to the little kids. If they say, how about them dogs? And I'd show them the logo here, and I'd say, what's that? They said, Georgia Bulldogs. And I like to, maybe I'm selfish, but I like to take credit for them being Bulldog fans now. All of them are Bulldog fans. Monroe, solid Bulldog. I bet there's not half a dozen Tech people in Monroe.
He started going to games at Sanford Stadium in 1929, when he could afford it.
During the Depression, didn't have the money to go to games, so my older brother would draw a football field on a piece of paper with a yard lines marked on it, and we'd take a buckeye and move it up and down as the ball moved. And Marcus Bartley was broadcasting the games back then, and we played on the card table.
But eventually, Georgia games became Herschel's, Mr. Bulldog's, obsession.
After the war, I started going pretty regular. Then in 58 or 59, I started going every game. I missed one or two between there and 62. But I haven't missed many. I haven't missed one in 40 years.
Mr. Scott's consecutive game streak, 465 games. The final stats will be on his tombstone.
Since a Bulldog born and Bulldog bred, he outlaw Bulldog dead. In the blank, consecutive games and blank, total bowl games. My daughter will have that filled in when I go to that big football field in the sky. You think there'd be football up there?
Today, games aren't quite the same for Mr. Bulldog.
And this is the thing I like. They sit down, except for the kickoff and maybe a goal line stand. Now they stand up, people, the whole game. Every time a play starts, they all jump up. And my legs won't let me jump up, so I miss a lot of the games.
But he'll always have the memories, especially when Tech was beaten.
Clint Castleberry and some of those playing for Tech, they won undefeated. We had lost Auburn. So I said, well, one that won the game over at Tech, and Georgia would be invited to the Rose Bowl. So we tore their fannies up. I don't like a color yellow or mustard. Won't even eat it on a hot dog.
Dan McGill remembers another beating at Sanford Stadium. It was November 11th, 1935, and LSU had come to town.
And after they had won the game, they came down to the field to tear up the goalposts. Well, on that particular day, one of the biggest baseball bat manufacturing companies was in Athens. It was called the Hannah Bat-Right Company. But they had given out sample bats just about 2 feet long to all the student body and the fans. So while the cadet corps, they didn't have their rifles or bayonets, the Georgia student body had these bats. And they ran the cadet corps off the field all the way to the train station. They still won the game. LSU was counted, but Georgia won the fight.
But most of the time, the crowds were well behaved. That wasn't necessarily true of the players. Joe Tarachinsky played for Georgia in the 1960s. His father, Joe Sr., played here in the early 40s.
It used to be a tradition that they would take the freshmen in the middle of the night, kidnap them and take them down because the creek runs underneath the Sanford Stadium and comes out across the way in the cemetery. And when you're a young freshman, you don't know that. And they used to take you and grab you and force you to walk through this tunnel. And it didn't matter who you were. When you got in that tunnel and you started hearing all these strange noises and squeaks and hitting the spider webs, you started crying. But you knew you couldn't go back. You just kept on feeling your way, slipping and sliding, and finally about halfway you see this faint blue light at the other end of the tunnel, and you'd start running. And then all of a sudden when you get out there, there's those tombstones. You thought you died and didn't know where you ended up. So it was a pretty big initiation for many years that the players used to have to go through that tunnel. And then eventually they stopped that, thank goodness, before I got here.
The river stayed, and so has the cemetery. But over the next 20 years, Sanford Stadium underwent some major changes. Field-level light stands were erected in 1940. 5 years later, Dr. Sanford died, but his project lived on. Temporary bleachers were spread all around, and 6,000 permanent seats were added to the south end in 1949. 10 years later, a 26-year-old assistant made his coaching debut in Sanford Stadium, but not for Georgia. Auburn's Vince Dooley was on the sidelines for the now famous game between the two schools.
And that was the game in which Fran Tarkenton threw a pass to Aaron, the receiver, late in the game to win the ball game 14-13, which gave Georgia its championship in 1959. So that was a bitter pill for me at the time because I was coaching at Auburn.
And at the time, Dooley gave the team and the fans high marks. Sanford Stadium was another issue.
I don't think at the particular time that I was overly impressed. I didn't think they did a good job with the structure of the press box, the additions that they had. I didn't think it was in conformity or harmony with the rest of the stadium. They put temporary bleachers in one place. The press box was not very well done, but I was impressed with what I thought was great potential.
And little did he know at the time, but Dooley's coaching potential and Sanford Stadium's potential to be a great stadium would come together just 5 years later. Georgia fans would have a hard time coming to Sanford Stadium without seeing this man, longtime Georgia football announcer Larry Munson. He came to Georgia in the early 60s, and by then, the competition, not just on the field, but in the stands, had grown fierce.
After I got here, which was then in the 60s, I realized it was almost like a race. It was almost like every single school was trying to get bigger and better. Almost year by year, everybody started expanding. And I would light a cigar and come walking slowly to the stadium. And we hadn't double-decked it up yet, and so we weren't quite this big, but we were getting pretty fancy looking. But people were cooking food all over, and some of them just had card tables out, and some of them were trying to be merchants and sell merchandise and doing it technically without the permission of the school or the conference. But you got to know all those people, and they wanted you to take a whole plate full of food, and you were trying to get upstairs. At the same time, you're trying to be nice, and people were handing you biscuits and sausage and stuff, and that went on for years and years. They would have cigars ready for me and stuff like that, and those were great times. They really were.
Great times on the field were more scarce. The Bulldogs were losing more than their share of games in the early 60s. Then in 1964, 31-year-old Vince Dooley rode into town.
The athletic director who came here was a person that was at Auburn. He was a basketball coach, and we had scouted together. And Georgia at the time was going through some very troubling times. He became the athletic director. They gave him the authority to hire the coach, and he stuck his neck out a mile and selected me, a total unknown. I was the freshman coach, which was my background, of the rival school at the age of 31. And that's not very good credentials to be the head football coach at Georgia, but nevertheless, they made a commitment to the athletic director, and he hired me.
The changes at Sanford Stadium came quickly. The lights, hard to see around, were removed. End zone seats were added. And one more thing, Georgia started winning again.
The first year, we went to a bowl game, and Georgia had not been to a bowl game in 3 or 4 years. They had not beaten Georgia Tech in 3 or 4 years. We not only beat Georgia Tech, we beat Florida, and had only beaten Florida 2 in about 14 years. And going to a bowl, we went to the Sun Bowl. They were so excited, you thought we had just won the national championship. And then by the next year, we beat Alabama, who were national champions. We beat Michigan, that were Rose Bowl champions, and Big Ten champions. And then by the third year, we won the SEC. So then it was quite obvious that there was great enthusiasm and there was a need to expand the stadium.
The question was how to expand. The Atlanta architectural firm of Heery & Heery was hired to come up with a plan.
Fortunately, we had some architects, I think, who presented, did a tremendous job of presenting plans that were harmonious with the base of the stadium.
I think at that point it was to create a stadium that had some amenities for the fans, brought them closer to the field, and respected the existing architecture of the stadium that was already there. It was a challenge when we got involved in the early 60s because it's a very tight site. That is one of the most urban kind of stadium situations on a campus. There are a lot of adjacent academic buildings, so it was a squeeze to fit the stadium additions and the master plan growth of that stadium within the fabric of that campus master plan.
We took a lot of those old temporary seats out, and they were strictly temporary seats. The press box was not well constructed. That was removed. So when we built the first edition in the upper deck, we were able to put a brand new press box in. And again, that was in harmony with the stadium.
In the first phases, it was a pretty straightforward addition. We did increase the number of amenities. One of the early stadiums to have club seating in it. So we brought in a club seating which would allow us to overhang the lower seating, and then an upper deck that overhung the club seating. And all of that brought the stadium in closer to the field. Made it a more intimidating place for the opposing team to try to play in. And it brought the fans closer to the action. It also left room between the edge of the stadium and the academic buildings to the side so that we didn't really encumber any of the other facilities on the campus.
The result? A double-deck stadium with 19,640 additional seats. The cost? $3 million. The new and improved 59,000-seat Sanford Stadium premiered on September 23, 1967 against Mississippi State. And once again, the Bulldogs didn't disappoint, winning 30-0. Current Georgia Director of Football Operations Steve Greer played on that team.
As a player in 1967, they had just double-decked 1967. When I came here as a freshman in 65, there was no upper deck. It was just when you came in off of Field Street, it was the top level. You still had the telephone poles for the lights. I've seen all the changes.
One of Greer's teammates was born in Athens. His father, Porter, was a star player at Georgia from 1948 to 1950. His name, Billy Payne.
And I remember at that point I must have been 5 or 6. And I remember going up there and sitting on the knees of Coach Butts and Coach Lumpkin and riding in the bus with the team down to the scrimmage from the dressing room. And so I have very, very vivid memories for that whole period of time up until I was about 13 or 14 years old, going to Sanford Stadium, golly, 4 or 5 times a year. It's where my dad fought and sweated and you know, made his name as an athlete. And that made it very special to me, a sacred ground to me. I remember almost laughing at here I was, my head coach at the University of Georgia was only about 13 or 14 years older than I was. And I remember the first time we met him, you know, we walked in and we had a team meeting and we left and said, man, he could be playing on this team. He's going to be our coach. Well, we quickly learned that Coach Dooley was the disciplinarian and the boss. My 3-year period, when I came, freshmen couldn't play on the varsity. So the 3 years I played on the varsity, we only lost 4 games. Didn't lose any in Sanford Stadium. So I'm one of the lucky few who can say that I never lost a game in Sanford Stadium, and that's a great memory.
Payne walked out of Sanford Stadium with a degree in 1968 and would run back in 28 years later to a site he helped create and one we'll likely never see again. By the 1970s, Sanford Stadium had many established characteristics, like the hedges and a mascot cemetery.
One newspaper account said we were the only major college team or college stadium in the country that buries our mascots within the stadium. I think there are 5 Uggers in there. We do not bury our former coaches there. That needs to be stressed. The original mascot was a goat. Why? I don't know. And then we got into the Bulldogs, and then thanks to Sonny Sala, we've gotten into these purebred Bulldogs. We're kind of genetic disasters, but cute dogs.
But outside Sanford Stadium, another group had been making a name for themselves for years.
We call them the track people. They had a wonderful time. It became a great tradition.
All the color of the place was those thousands, literally thousands of kids who showed up on Fridays and fought for places to get on the tracks, and many of them wrapped themselves up in plastic and slept all night. And I suppose they had a couple of beers, but it was a real good crowd on the tracks, and they got a little raucous, I guess, but there was a good bunch, and that was really part of tradition, I think, at Georgia football for a long time. For many, many, many years, there was just one great big crowd on those railroad tracks, and it became quite a thing for the students to fight for position on those tracks.
They were true Georgia fans. I guess a lot of them didn't have the money to get in.
I remember the years earlier as a young teenager and going to games with my dad, there were a lot of folks on the railroad that thought that'd be an economical way to watch the dogs play. And I used to laugh. I used to say to my dad, half the stadium's empty. Why are there so many people on the railroad tracks? and I think he'd say that we had some rough years, and I think he'd say, well, just look at the score. Maybe that'll explain it.
But in 1980, the track people finally met their match on and off the field. First, it was a guy named Herschel Walker.
A 5-3, and they run a track with Herschel Walker. Got a hole, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. There goes Herschel. There goes Herschel. Herschel Walker scores. Hole at the right tackle. Man, did he turn it on when he had to. Suddenly, and the stadium trembles and cracks a little bit.
Georgia's greatest player led the Dogs to a 1980 national championship, solidifying an even greater demand for more seats. Coach Dooley had already decided it was time to kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
When you get that many people together, then injuries set in. We did have somebody that rolled down the hill and had an injury problem, so it was beginning to be a problem.
But I was talking to Vince. Says going in a larger stadium, they were talking about the other end from the railroad. Said, well, you know, I have a tradition, people sitting on the railroad track. I said, how much do they pay? How much money does it bring in? He smiled.
And the final solution to the problem came when we closed the East End Inn, and the track people did not like that. In fact, I had them come by with signed petitions, how important they were to Georgia's tradition, that the cameras focus in on them. And they didn't mention they'd been watching the game free for about 15 years, but nevertheless, they were very proud of their tradition, and but at the same time, it was causing some problems.
So once again, Harry was called in.
It provided a more intimidating environment. It helps hold the sound more into the stadium, gives the people in the end zone a great view. It did solve sort of the problem of all the people sitting on the railroad tracks watching the game, but that view kind of went away. But it also left the other end open, which is open to the campus, so that the stadium, really the open end, is now a part of the campus. And people can see into the stadium on non-game day, and game day, those in the stands get to see out and look at the rest of the campus. So that's really a great feature.
So what did Georgia get for $11.5 million? 20,000 new seats made with 20,000 cubic yards of concrete and 2.5 million pounds of rebar, now filled with paying customers.
Each edition is in harmony with the previous edition or the base edition, so that when somebody observes the stadium, they think that somebody started this stadium from scratch and built it all the way to what it is today.
That harmony continued when 4,000 more seats behind the west end zone were built in 1991, but the expansion didn't stop there.
The next big move, when it became obvious that we needed to add some seats, but the trend during the 80s and into the 90s was that luxury seats is what some people were looking for and could afford. So we went to build Sky Suites, and that was a trying experience because, again, the stadium was so much in harmony that we were worried what this would do to it. Nevertheless, once again, they came up with a good plan, and we initially added 30 Sky Suites, and we sold them out.
We planned for 2 levels of skyboxes above the south stands. They're fairly tall. They're not as tall as, say, the ones at University of Tennessee. But because they overhang the deck and they're up high, they have a great view of the field.
In 1994, more than 86,000 people could now fill Sanford Stadium to watch a game. What would the stadium's namesake have thought were he still around?
I think he would look back now and say, that was my greatest accomplishment. At the time, he saw it as just a part of helping the university and helping young people in Georgia with their educations. He thought with automobiles and the highway system of the 20s coming along, that to have people come from all over Georgia to see the young people and to see sports activities was a real basis for supporting a program. And I think he was as much a fan of education as he was of football. Of course, it never hurts to make people happy on a Saturday afternoon in Athens, and I think that he considered always one of his major goals in life.
What was left of Dr. Sanford's vision? The original stands, never in danger of being removed. But what about the famous hedges? Well, that's another story. Billy Payne had been a star on the Georgia football team in the mid-'60s, but 20 years later, he had an idea: bring the Olympic Games to Atlanta.
I can remember when Billy first mentioned the fact, we were at a cocktail party years ago, and Billy mentioned the fact that I'm going to bring the Olympics to Atlanta. And I said, Billy, can I get one more beer before I talk to you about it?
But a dream had become reality. Atlanta was awarded the 1996 Games, and the man in charge of that effort wanted to pay the University of Georgia back for all it had given him.
It was critically important to me that the University of Georgia play a significant role in the Olympics. It was the introduction of women's soccer to the Games as first time as a medal sport. The United States had a great team. I knew it would be an incredibly exciting event. And therefore, there was only one place to have it, and that was in Sanford Stadium. Of course, I was kind of busy, and I didn't bother with all the measurements, but as it turns out, the curve at the end of the stadiums on both ends of Sanford Stadium made it too narrow for the width required for soccer. So I went to Coach Dooley and I said, well, we got a little problem here.
In order to do that, it means you had to restructure the stadium and take out the hedges. And I knew that this was going to be a serious problem with some of our football purists. I mean, they could not imagine taking out the sacred hedges, particularly to play soccer out there.
He probably thought about the security of his job, you know, that I'd lost my mind, how are we going to get away with this?
I did come up with a good plan, though. I did feel like that our hedges were going down a little bit, so I had a couple of of horticulture experts on disease to go look at them.
He did a lot of research, talked with all the engineers, and he got all the agronomists in there, and I think he would confirm that the hedges that were in place at that time were just about at the end of their normal life cycle and needed replacing.
No, I didn't do anything to the hedges, but they found a bad case of nematodes, a very serious case.
That's the story we decided to stick to anyway.
So what we did, we took cuttings of the original hedge and kind of the sons and daughters of the hedge, and we grew them for 3 years while we redid the stadium.
I think for a while there, both Coach Dooley and I became on the hit list of Georgia fans in terms of popularity.
We grew them in two places. We grew one in Dudley Nursery in Thompson, but we also needed a backup. So we also grew some others in Florida, but we did not disclose what part of Florida because of the closeness to some of our enemies in that area.
Finally, on a glorious, hedgeless summer day in Athens, Billy Payne ran back out onto his beloved field, this time with a torch in his hand.
Very recently before then, only less than 2 months, I'd had neck surgery. I drew some confidence in the fact I only had to run 200 yards down and back. And I remember very vividly that as I made the turn to come back, my hip gave out on me. And the reason it did, that part of the graft they put in my neck, they'd taken as a piece of my hip bone. So, you know, it hurt more than the neck did. I was very noticeably limping and I was embarrassed and everything. But nevertheless, I saw Coach Dooley waiting for me on the other end, and kind of reminded me of my football days. You know, I had a job to do and I had to make it to the end, which I did.
Eventually, the U.S. women's soccer team would win gold in Sanford Stadium in front of the largest crowd to ever watch a women's soccer game.
It was important. I told Coach Dooley before I did, I said, this torch will never leave Sanford Stadium. And I gave it to him. I said, do whatever you want to with it, but I don't want it to leave here. And he kept it locked under lock and key in Sanford Stadium until they built an appropriate little glass enclosure to put it in as you walk on the lower level underneath the bridge there, and it's there today.
But what about the hedges? They, like the memories of Olympic fame, were safe in the hands of Vince Dooley.
The original hedges, the sons and daughters who went on a vacation at their young age to grow up in Florida, but they came back home to their proper birthplace.
And the hedges thrived, except for an ugly incident in 2000, after the Bulldogs finally beat Tennessee at home after years of frustration.
The next game, because we had to trim back the hedges, we had sticks out there, and I do think that there was a great sense of remorse from those that saw what they had done in this post-game celebration.
But like the stadium itself, the hedges persevered. With the addition of more skyboxes and the building of 5,000 additional seats on the north end, Sanford Stadium has become the 5th largest on-campus stadium in the country. What will the future hold for this great stadium? One thing you can probably count on is more seats. Maybe in the west end zone, maybe not.
There's no limit to where we may go. What we don't want to do is close in that end zone because it's so beautiful, but it may be the only place that we'll have left if we have to add seats in the future.
It is on the drawing board and has been on the drawing board for years. Actually, the design for the west end zone came in about 1979 ahead of the east end zone. We would hate to lose the capability of being able to look into the stadium from the bridge area and not seeing the panorama of the stadium in the background. I think that would be something we don't want to lose.
And that would be to put in a bowl similar to the upper deck on the east side. But we would probably leave the club level open so that the people that are on the road now, that road would become a plaza that would overlook into the stadium, so you'd still have that campus to stadium connection on a daily, year-round basis, even when the stadium's not being used.
But no matter what the future, Sanford Stadium will always be one of the most cherished places in college football. A truly great stadium.
I occasionally make speeches up there at night in those skyboxes before sponsor groups and donor groups and things. And that's quite a view up there at night when the lights are on down on the field. As much as I may hate night football, and as you get older, you hate the dog out of night football, it's still something to stand on top of the stadium at night when the lights are on in the stadium and you're standing there working.
There's something about Sanford Stadium and the University of Georgia that is probably the most beautiful place to play a football game in the world.
Saturday afternoon, the sun's shining, you got a sea of red, you know, you can begin to hear the excitement, you know, in pregame warm-ups. And to be between the hedges, you know, is exciting for me.
The sound really carries well. You can really hear the hits. You can hear the collisions. The hedges are beautiful, and just the way it sits, it's just a natural setting for everybody. It's a great place to play college football.
I think when you take it overall, from the standpoint of tradition, from the standpoint of beauty, from the standpoint of the setting, from the standpoint of all of the additions being harmonious with the original stadium, I don't think there's a better stadium in America.
You know, I've been to 110 countries of the world, to a lot of stadiums, and I've yet to see one any prettier than Sanford Stadium. It's like it was, you know, God intended a stadium to be there.
For more information on this program and others in the Great Stadium series, call toll-free 1-866-459-4473.
Tonight, stay with Georgia Public Broadcasting for television you won't want to miss.
Of a world war. They were prisoners of politics. The world stopped and watched two men fight for the title of champion.